This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Turkey promises necessary response after Turkish diplomat is killed in a shooting at a restaurant in Iraq. WHO to announce decision shortly on whether to declare DRC Ebola an international emergency. And Sudan's opposition group celebrates signing of political accord with military council. This is Africa Live. A very warm welcome from Nairobi. I am Penny Nakaribe, and with me in studio with a sneak peek of what's ahead in business news is Uche.
Thank you, Penina. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Kenya deports 17 directors of betting firms as it cracks down on illegal gambling. And some mixed reactions to South Africa's recently approved carbon tax bill. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you.
Thank you, Uche. Let's begin in Iraq, where a Turkish diplomat has been killed in a shooting in the Kurdish capital of Abyei. The vice consul was one of at least 2 people shot dead in the attack on a local restaurant. Local media says security and emergency officials have responded, and the scene is now on lockdown. Iraq's self-governing Kurdish region is politically allied with the Turkish government, where such attacks are rare. Our correspondent Mikhail Bardavid tells us more.
Well, it's still very early. It's just been a couple of hours since the attack took place, but we already have some statements made by Turkish officials. The Turkish Foreign Ministry has stated that they are working very closely with local authorities in Iraq, that an investigation has been launched and that they will follow up in trying to find out who is responsible for this attack. They've offered condolences to the victims' families. There was also a statement made by the Turkish presidential spokesman, Ibrahim Kalin. He stated that the necessary response will be given, so we can expect a retaliation from Turkey as soon as they have confirmation regarding who is behind this attack.
Meanwhile, in Sudan, all-night talks have finally broken the deadlock between the country's military council and opposition leaders. They have signed a power-sharing deal after weeks of mediation by international and regional powers, including the African Union. The two sides have been wrangling for weeks over who will lead Sudan to democratic elections. CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports.
Sudan's military leaders and opposition alliance have signed a power-sharing accord. After months of stalled discussions, the two sides finally signed a political declaration. This is seen as a key step in the transition to democracy and civilian rule. The document was signed in Khartoum in the presence of African mediators.
It is a great moment that the people of the Sudan have reached this historic moment. The parties, I would not say the different entities of the Sudan, but a unit, a united front that represents the gallant army of the Sudan, the Transitional Military Council, and of course, the revolutionary youth, intellectuals, pioneers who have taken to the streets to stand for democracy.
The Transitional Military Council and the Opposition Forces for Declaration of Freedom and Change have agreed to a joint sovereign council. The Transitional Council will lead Sudan for just over 3 years before elections take place. As the highest level of power in Sudan, this new council will be made of 5 civilians and 5 military figures. A 6th civilian member, previously rumored to be a retired army general, will be chosen by the 10 members. Under the agreement, a general will lead for the first 21 months before a civilian takes over for the last 18. The power-sharing deal is meant to end weeks of deadlock after a protester sit-in was raised by security forces last month. The deal promises an investigation into the violence.
In all of Sudan, in the south, north and west, we're celebrating a historic day. And we salute the martyrs who sacrificed their life for Sudan.
I'm so happy to announce this morning the best wishes to our people and to announce the signing in with initial letters between the military council and the forces of the Declaration of Freedom and Change.
This signed accord is only one half of the deal. The second document, a constitutional declaration, is expected to be signed within days. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
The Arab League has been keenly following developments in Sudan and has promised to do all it can to help Sudan make a smooth transition. CGTN's Adel Mahroui is in Cairo for us and joins us live for more on this. Adel, how is the Arab League reacting to the signing of the political accord in Sudan?
Well, the Arab League was actually part of the agreement itself. One of the signatures on that agreement, or as a testimonial, was the representative of the Arab League. Months ago, the Arab League has been investing into the assistance, pushing a delegation dedicated to the Sudan's political conflict, and has been working with the political powers and the military council to reach such an achievement. So, in part, it has the effort, and it has been taking some of the efforts to reach today's agreement. That's why it was recorded that the Arab League representative was a witness to that agreement. So in general, it means that the Arab League has, or the agreement has the blessing of the Arab League, and therefore the rest of the Arab states toward it. There isn't any concern except for all parties to commit to the articles mentioned in that agreement and make sure that the transitional period goes without any major disputes, at least politically, until the completion of the transitional period and handing over power to an elected authority.
And Adel, to what extent do you think the Arab League will be involved in the transition process once the constitutional declaration is in place to clear a path for a transitional council?
Well, the Arab League's role will not be ending at that phase. It will continue to monitor the situation and continue, not just in terms of a special case dedicated or given for the Arab League to be part of this political transition, but part of the agreement actually was to call for international organizations. The UN, the European Union, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, the Arab League, and the African Union. In the agreement, all these organizations have been mentioned to assist Sudan economically, to give aid and maintain that Sudanese economic progress is supported and maintained by these organizations. Also, to give it a support internationally. Sudan is seeking, with this agreement and the new change in the administration, to lift the sanctions imposed over Sudan, and therefore these organizations, the Arab League and the rest, will be playing a very integral part in the coming period. Their testimonial on the transparency, on the commitment of the civilian and military powers to the agreement will greatly affect the future of Sudan, specifically when it comes to the international community reconsideration to the sanctions imposed on Khartoum.
All right, Adel, thank you for that update. Adel Mahroui live in Cairo. Now, the UN has convened a meeting in Geneva to decide whether the current Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo constitutes an international health emergency. A decision is expected any time now. Last month, the World Health Organization said that the outbreak did not qualify as an international threat, even though cases had been confirmed in neighboring Uganda. But now, the disease has once again been identified outside the outbreak epicenters of Ituri and North Kivu province. The first Ebola patient has died in the DRC's largest city of Goma, which lies close to the Rwandan border. To date, there have been more than 2,500 cases of infection and over 1,600 deaths. This is the fourth time that the emergency panel have met during the 11-month outbreak. A declaration would include recommendations for international action and could also help unlock desperately needed funds. Meanwhile, Ugandan authorities are closely monitoring about 50 people after a fishmonger vomited at Mpondwe Market in Uganda on July the 11th before dying of Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo. 590 fishmongers at the market could be targeted for vaccination, according to the World Health Organization. It is yet to be established who had transported the woman or her goods, as well as her movements. Let's get more now on this from CGTN's Daniel Arap Moi, who is in Hoima district in southwestern Uganda. He joins us on the line from there. So Daniel, what have you gathered from the Uganda Health Ministry about this situation in Mpondwe Market?
Well, thank you very much. I earlier on spoke to the spokesperson for the Ministry of Health Uganda. And the reports that we got from the ministry is that the woman that died was a fishmonger that crossed Mponde border into Uganda. She came on the 11th and entered into Uganda. But what the ministry officials are saying is that she came with the signs of Ebola already showing on her. And when she came, she met quite a few people since she was a well-known businesswoman. She met, first of all, she met about 19 people. After that, the government says that she also had an opportunity to go to a forex bureau, and the government right now is trying to work with authorities from the DRC to monitor the 19 people, first of all, that she came into contact with, and also the people from the forex bureau where she went to exchange some money. Now, there are also about 590 people that the government is saying are being closely monitored because this woman interacted with quite a number of fishmongers since she was a businesswoman. So basically that is it. But the government also says that she might have entered into Uganda through an authorized border point, not the official border point. That's why she managed to cross into Uganda.
All right, Daniel, we know that Mpondo Market is near the Kasese border with the DRC. Can you describe the nature of movements and interactions between people across the border and how this impacts on Ebola interventions there?
Well, Mpondo border, of course, it's a market border point between Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. So really, trade between the two countries is very, very free. Traders cross anytime. But now the biggest challenge is that there are border points that are very porous, and those are the areas that authorities are very much concerned about, that some people can cross through those unmanned borders, and if they have cases of Ebola, that would mean that they will freely enter into Uganda and have contacts with several people. So Mpondo is a very, 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 very busy border point indeed, with traders crossing any time of the day, any time of the night.
All right, Daniel Arap Moi on the line from southwestern Uganda. Thank you. Now, in South Sudan, a delegation from the Health Ministry, UN agencies and donor countries has traveled to the town of Abyei. They're there to offer support in preventing the spread of Ebola to the central equatorial region. Abyei is the hardest hit by the conflict that has raged across the country for 6 years. CGTN's Brian Toussaint has more.
A high-level delegation is in the town of Abyei to raise awareness about the deadly virus. The disease is causing immense suffering just across the border in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Because of Ebola, once again, Abyei is at the front lines of a new battle, and really, in many ways, because of this Ebola threat, it is the most important place in South Sudan right now. This is the place, I think, where we're most worried about what could happen here.
One of the most important prevention measures is educating the community so they can recognize the risks, be alert to symptoms, and know how to take action if they become aware of a potential Ebola case.
It can be a bit frustrating when you're preparing for a long time and the disease doesn't come and you have many other problems, but I really want to tell the community members here that actually if Ebola does come and if it's not controlled, it will actually become your biggest problem, bigger than malaria, bigger than everything else. So it's really important to have that awareness, because communities in South Sudan can defeat Ebola. They can't prevent it from really taking over their communities. So it's really important that they use the knowledge that they have, and that they are really that they're keeping a sharp eye on any potential Ebola cases, so that even if it comes to South Sudan, that it can't spread widely.
South Sudanese health officials recognize the seriousness of the Ebola threat. They are working with humanitarian partners to implement a prevention and response plan. This includes border surveillance and screening, infection prevention and control, and establishing treatment and isolation facilities.
In South Sudan, particularly is very important in the sense that we have a communal way of living that encourages the spread of disease through interaction between members of the family. For example, during the burials, in some communities, the disease may be kept for days, and people dancing around the body and touching and kissing that the corpse. And I think in the case of Ebola, that will be a dangerous thing to do. So the involvement of the community, educating them, and take the ownership of the measures that are required to prevent the spread of the disease is quite important.
Many countries have donated funds to the fight against Ebola in South Sudan. A new ambulance and motorbikes to help health workers access remote areas were brought in with the funds. Despite that generosity, it's only half of the funding needed. An additional $14 million is required to prevent and adequately prepare for the spread of Ebola. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
And this is Africa Live. We're taking a short break. Coming up, UN sends more peacekeepers to probe killing of Peacekeeper and 5 civilians at Sudan border with South Sudan. And a meeting of hundreds of scientists from across Africa closes in Senegal with reflections on progress and health research challenges on the continent.
Africa, the most iconic wildlife destination in the world. Its unique ecosystems were formed over countless eons. Many people can only dream of visiting this natural paradise. But now, for the first time ever, CGTN Wild Wonderland live show is bringing Africa to you through all of our online platforms. 14 episodes from July 22nd to 28th take you to adventure through the Great Plains of Kenya's Masai Mara, the Serengeti in Tanzania, and the Greater Kruger Park in South Africa. Welcome aboard the wildest ride of a lifetime. This is Wild Wonderland live show, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
One Ethiopian United Nations peacekeeper and 5 civilians have died in the disputed region of Abyei that lies on the border between Sudan and South Sudan. Peacekeepers had been conducting a routine patrol when they were attacked by unknown gunmen who left one other soldier injured. One of the deceased is believed to be a child, according to Area Governor Kuol Alor Jog. The incident occurred at the Amiet market north of Abyei. South Sudan gained independence from Sudan in 2011, but the status of Abyei was not settled. The region has seen violence between those who wish to join the South and those who want to be part of the North. A peacekeeping mission has been maintained in the area since 2011. The UN Secretary General has conveyed his condolences to Ethiopia and to the families of the slain civilians. Military officials attending the first China-Africa Peace and Security Forum have visited the Special Police College in Beijing. The college has carried out exchanges with delegations from more than 150 countries and regions. Participants say such visits like Wednesday's can boost both exchanges and understanding. CGTN correspondent Han Bin has more.
This combat-oriented training showcases the strength of China's elite armed police forces. It's a routine practice at the Special Police College, but today it has a special purpose. This is part of the programs of the first China-African Peace and Security Forum, which aims to strengthen cooperation.
I believe your visit here will play an active role in fulfilling the cooperative consensus reached by leaders of China and African countries and enhancing friendship between China and African countries. We would also like to carry out in-depth exchanges with your military forces in the future.
The Special Police College was founded in 1985 to train personnel for anti-terrorism operations. For 30 years, a large number of its graduates have gone on to serve in China's public security forces and the People's Armed Police Forces.
It is a very high training and it requires a lot of energy for young people. I hope that our young kids get the opportunity to come and join their colleagues here to get the training.
I'm very happy. I take this lesson from Chinese Special Force College.
So you think the Chinese police forces and the military forces can play a growing role in Africa's peace and security?
Of course. You can play the very good role for the Africans' peace, security, and sustain prosperity. So I'm confident for this.
Many participants say China's commitment to peacekeeping in Africa should continue. And with the Belt and Road initiatives, the need for security cooperation is on the rise. Compared with the economic links, China-Africa security cooperation has been lagging behind, but this is changing. Today's visit to the China Special Police is another sign that the two sides are deepening trust, and a new mechanism of security cooperation is in the making. Han Bin, CGTN, Beijing.
Meanwhile, the 7th batch of the Chinese peacekeeping force conducted a live ammunition drill on Tuesday in the Malian city of Gao. The drill was carried out to test, among other things, the combat readiness of various types of ammunition, the accuracy of weapons, and the capability of the peacekeepers in responding to emergencies.
Through live ammunition drills, soldiers will have a better understanding of the performance of their weapons and equipment. They will also have a deeper understanding of how to shoot effectively in the hot, windy and dry conditions in Mali. We want to make sure that the soldiers can kill the enemy with one shot and hit the target without a miss in case of an emergency.
Hundreds of scientists from Africa have been meeting in Senegal to reflect on the progress and health research challenges on the continent. The Delta's 2019 Africa Scientific Conference closed on Wednesday.
Experts are seeking to build a strong research community and promote health through research. One of the areas of discussions in this gathering, organized by the African Academy of Sciences, is the fight against malaria. Experts say Africa alone accounts for 80% of global malaria cases. More than half of these cases are reported in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Nigeria.
L'Afrique a besoin d'une masse critique de jeunes chercheurs.
The presence of world leaders, researchers, high-level decision-makers, regional and international organizations presents a unique opportunity to strengthen advocacy with a view to better control or even eradicate certain diseases that are still present in Africa.
Et de représentants du secteur.
Pour l'élimination du paludisme, il faut l'apport des scientifiques.
To eradicate malaria, we need the contribution of science. We have recorded new techniques, in particular, mass treatments, to which we have added primaquine, which is a drug to combat gameticides. By combining this in areas where malaria has decreased significantly, we hope to eliminate it.
De masse auquel on ajoute.
There is considerable progress made in recent years in the fight against malaria, but many challenges remain in the quest of building healthier communities in Africa.
The problems we face are environmental. If we want to do quality research, we must build an adequate research environment, equipment. We must also work on a critical mass of the kind that will be able to reflect on Africa's problems and propose solutions.
Les connaissances sont très vite obsolètes. A malaria vaccine pilot campaign is currently ongoing in Malawi, Ghana and Kenya. Researchers hope this preventive approach will help eradicate malaria in Africa. Chom Rono, CGTN.
South Africa is making huge advances in the fight against the HIV/AIDS epidemic. That was revealed at the launch of UNAIDS Global AIDS Update report in Eshowe, KwaZulu-Natal. The report represents the latest data about the global status of the HIV epidemic. The global body, however, warned that lack of funding remains a stumbling block in ending HIV/AIDS. CGTN's Elisa Njamela has more.
The choice venue for the launch of the UNAIDS Global Report was deliberate. It's here in Eshowe. Eshowe was chosen because it surpassed UNAIDS 1990 targets before the 2020 global deadline, thanks to a community project run by Doctors Without Borders. In 2014, UNAIDS launched the 1990 targets with the aim to diagnose 90% of all HIV-positive persons, provide antiretroviral therapy for 90% of those diagnosed, and achieve viral suppression for 90% of those treated by 2020. The Eshowe community in particular have managed to reach the 1990 targets. But while there are some successes, the United Nations has issued a stark warning that a deepening funding gap threatens global progress towards ending the HIV and AIDS pandemic.
Strong political leadership is needed in every country to put AIDS back on the agenda. It is the only way ending AIDS can become a conceivable reality. It starts with investing adequately and smartly, and by looking at what's making some countries so successful.
South Africa's Deputy President David Mabuza officiated the event in his capacity as South African National AIDS Council Chairperson or SANEC.
As government, we wish to commit ourselves to reinvigorate our response to this epidemic by prioritizing primary prevention and ensuring that everyone who needs treatment is put on treatment.
We need more resources. The resources should not be reduced. And of course, we must also show that South Africa has matched with its own contribution on the resources. That's why we've got the largest program of antiretroviral treatment in the whole world.
In 2018, 37.9 million people were living with HIV and AIDS. The UN AIDS report also warns that while inroads are being made, there's still a long way to go in Eastern and Southern Africa, the region most affected by the disease. The global body believes that success stories such as those of Abyei prove that the 90-90-90 target can be achieved, but the body also warns that the reality of the future is such that if international funding is not increased, Abyei will remain a lone island of success. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's now cross over to Uche for the day's business news.
Thanks, Penny. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Kenya deports 17 directors of betting firms as it cracks down on illegal gambling. And some mixed reactions to South Africa's recently approved carbon tax bill.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor, to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market. It's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in Kenya, where the government is now deporting 17 directors of gambling companies in an effort to crack down on the growing betting culture in the country. Now, the officials are accused of violating their work permits and failing to pay taxes on time. The government has also ordered telecoms companies to shut down their short codes operated by some of these betting firms, which of course has now sparked nationwide outrage. And staying in the country, the Central Bank of Kenya has issued new rules to payment service providers, warning of ultimate liability in case of criminal breaches. Now, in an effort to curb cybercrime, the central bank says commercial banks and tech firms should take responsibility for breaches through regular independent assessment and audit functions. Payment service providers, including MasterCard, Visa, Safaricom, Airtel and Telkom, have 90 days to comply with these requirements. Now, firms which are working with payment service providers are also expected to treat customer information confidentially. Meanwhile, Acacia Mining says it is seeking a stay of international arbitration proceedings against the government in Tanzania. Now, this comes a day before the deadline for a buyout proposal by Barrick Gold Corporation, which holds about 63.9% of its market share. Now, Acacia has been locked in a dispute over a 190 billion tax bill with the Tanzanian government. The mining firm is accused of breaching environmental regulations. The Tanzanian National Environment Management Council recently issued a notice for the company's North Mara mine in order to prevent it from using its tailings storage facility. Now, Acacia Mining is set to seek clarification and request investigation reports on which the notice is based. And heading to South Africa now, the country's long-delayed carbon tax bill was recently signed into law. The country, considered the 14th worst polluter in the world, is now moving towards lower emissions in its efforts to meet the agreements on global climate change. Well, here's CGTN's Alexandria Majala with the details.
South Africa recently introduced a new carbon tax in efforts to meet the global climate change targets set in Paris in 2015. The levy is expected to come into full force by 2020. However, it has already gotten criticism from environmental campaigners as well as industry players.
We employ about 400 people. If carbon tax get to a point where we simply cannot afford it, there are no other ways to reduce our emissions, and we will simply be forced to close our plant, and that will mean the loss of around 400 jobs.
As it is now, it means for the next 3 years we'll have a tax that will send a signal but effectively will not really contribute to reduce emissions. That is our fear. And when we look at the time frame that we have, it feels like 3 years lost, which we can't really afford.
A total of 46 countries globally have such taxes in place or scheduled for implementation. The carbon tax in South Africa is set at $8.30 per ton of carbon dioxide. This has thrown mining investors into a frenzy.
For a local producer, the question arises when the carbon tax rises too high. Do I import or do I produce? If the cost of production is so much with the Carbon Tax Act in place, is so much, I'm not going to produce, I'll rather import.
With the unemployment rate currently standing at 27% and youth joblessness above 50%, the poor working class communities are bound to be affected.
We want government and industry to focus on climate change and a way to deal with it, but we want a just transition plan which will reskill workers who will be affected, find new economic opportunities for them, and help create new environmentally sustainable industries like water recycling, renewable energy, electric vehicles, agricultural land, and so on.
I think the whole issue of just transition is important, particularly of low-income workers or those working in coal mines, that they shouldn't be made to feel the brunt of policies on climate change. The burden needs to be equally shared.
The national energy supplier Eskom is already on the brink of collapse as it struggles with $30 billion in debt. The state-owned power utility produces 90% of the country's electricity, and its projected tax liability is in the region of $830,000 a year. To meet the Paris Agreement targets, it aims to wind down its coal-powered stations and boost low-carbon energy production. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Well, let's stay in South Africa. Information technology is one of the country's fastest growing industries. However, there's still a shortage of skills in this sector. Young people often can't afford to get into ICT learning institutions. Now, with the government increasing its attention on youth employment, there's certainly been more involvement from the private sector in helping prospective students. Here's Sumitra Naidu with the story.
Rethink Code is a non-profit tech institution. It's come up with an innovative way to train students with digital skills. There are no fees, no classrooms and no teachers.
For the vast majority of our students, they have no prior experience. And all we really want to see is over that course of time, do they start to show that they're learning in the way that we teach. So our pedagogy is a peer-to-peer learning system. So we don't have lecturers or teachers. The idea is we use code to solve problems. And when you go into a work environment and your boss says, solve this problem, he's not going to tell you how to do it. And so you need to learn how to learn.
All teaching is done online, so it can be done at any time from anywhere with a good internet connection, cutting out transport and other associated costs. We Think Code is partnering with the private sector to make the model viable and to absorb new talent.
Most of all the industries we now know are moving from the old ways to the tech front. Most of the data that we have can be digitized now. You have a machine doing a job that 20 people could do, and that's what we're moving towards as a country and as a planet, to be honest. And so more than worthwhile, it's actually essential to move towards the tech sphere, regardless of what industry you are in now.
You're starting to see South African companies that are reaching scale. If you look at companies like Get Smarter and Yoko, they're really starting to grow quite quickly. But we're also seeing a lot more corporates, and so entities that have existed since the early 1900s that are now saying, you know, we need to look at how we manage our own processes and how technology can impact our business.
Students are aged between 17 and 35. They have to undergo a 2-year course with practical application outcomes. Student admission also involves a series of logic tests to assess their aptitude for coding. Thereafter, there's a 3.5-week boot camp to assess their perseverance and willingness to learn.
My first year was 8 months, and I went to my internship for 4 months. It was amazing. They actually do projects that actually go into the real world, like production. It's pretty cool to have your work out there.
It's been cool. It's been a bit hectic as well. There's no textbooks that you learn as you go. So there's not going to be points in which you just study for a hard test and then you write it, then you forget, because all the hard work that you put in wasn't you just sitting down reading something.
We Think Code is managing to bridge two vital gaps in South Africa: education and unemployment. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And on the international front, former German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen has been elected as the new president of the European Commission. With a narrow win, she made history by becoming the first woman to be elected to the top job. Nearly 750 members of the European Parliament voted for her, winning with just 9 votes over the threshold. Here's CGTN's Mariam Zaidi in Brussels describing how that vote played out.
374. The magic number needed to succeed Jean-Claude Juncker at the EU Commission. But could the former German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen do it?
Vote in favour, 383.
A win by a whisker. Ahead of Tuesday evening's secret ballot at the European Parliament, as Ursula von der Leyen called for a stronger, gender-balanced and greener Europe, her prospects didn't appear too rosy.
I want Europe to become the first climate-neutral continent in the world by 2050. We must take bold steps together to reduce CO2 emissions by 2030 by 50, if not 55%.
For the Greens in the Parliament, the devil was in the lack of detail.
Goodwill and general intentions are not enough. We need a fierce determination to change course, even if it strikes the interests of those who defend the status quo. You will understand that in these conditions, the Greens are not ready today to entrust you with the rudder of the Union.
Also not supporting von der Leyen, far-right Eurosceptics, right-wing nationalists and far-left MEPs.
Plus de 800 milliards d'euros.
More than 800 billion euros is the check that the European Union makes every year to tax evaders. You are their candidate. We prefer to tear it up rather than vote for you.
But von der Leyen managed to cobble together a majority of Parliament's 3 largest parties: the European People's Party, the Liberal Renew Europe and Socialists. Von der Leyen has squeaked over the line by just 9 votes. Even her predecessor, Jean-Claude Juncker, managed to get 422 from a maximum of 729 votes. But no matter the fine margins, Ursula von der Leyen takes her place in history as the first woman at the helm of the European Commission. Mariam Zaidi, CGTN, Brussels.
Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund Executive Board has said it will begin its selection process for its next managing director. And that's after Christine Lagarde announced her formal resignation on Tuesday. Now, the resignation takes effect on September 12th this year. Weeks ago, Lagarde was nominated for the presidency of the European Central Bank. She is set to replace Mario Draghi and be the first woman to lead the ECB. Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up on Global Business Africa, COMESA leaders promote regional trade during Kenya's Trade Week in Nairobi. Of course, we'll bring you more on that top of the hour. For now, back to you, Penina.
Thank you, Uche. And this is Africa Live, still ahead. A young Nigerian cashes in on the popularity of the Yoruba Amala cuisine in Lagos.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, the UN convened an emergency meeting today to decide whether to declare the DRC's Ebola outbreak of international concern. The WHO panel of experts met for the 4th time during the 11th outbreak. Let's now take you live to Geneva for that announcement.
Announcements and declaration, and afterwards we're ready, of course, to take questions. Professor Stefan, please go ahead.
Thank you and good evening. The Ebola emergency meeting has today advised the Director General to declare a public health emergency of international concern, a FIC. What does that mean? This is still a regional emergency and by no way a global threat. And why this change of opinion? Despite the collective effort and particularly a tremendous support by both the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the commitment of the people fighting in the field against Ebola, also despite significant improvement in many places in a tremendously complex situation, now, first, there is concern about spread of Ebola from Goma, a getaway, even though so far no cases were newly infected in this city. 2, there is disappointment that there has been a recurrence of intense transmission in Beni, so that the geographical expansion is now some 500 kilometers. 4, the fight is ongoing for a full year now. And lastly, the assassination of 2 Ebola workers demonstrates the continued risk to responders due to security situation. Let me underline that the FIC is not declared as a reflection on a suboptimal performance of those active in the field, for instance the response teams or the government of the DRC. The rationale is to better cope with the volatile characteristics of this outbreak. The strategy is not to be changed. We need to intensify the actions, also to become more proactive. In declaring a FIC, the committee put utmost emphasis that this should not interfere with travel and trade more than needed. As per Article 2 of the International Health Regulations, all actions must be commensurate. Explicitly, there should be no closure of borders by any of the neighboring countries of the DRC or anywhere else, because that would have a terrible impact on the economy of the affected regions. Such impact would likely to have negative consequences on the fight against the outbreak. The committee re-emphasized the recommendations issued during earlier emergency committee meetings and also during the 2014 to 16 outbreak in West Africa. Among the most important, preparedness must be enhanced in neighboring countries. So far, there is insufficient support for these complex actions. The list of all the recommendations you will find in your handouts. Finally, the committee is concerned that resources have become a limiting factor in technical assistance. Increasingly, there is lack of staff and of financial support. There must be more engagement by the global community to end this outbreak. Thank you.
Professor Stefan, thank you very much. Over you, Director General.
Thank you, Professor Stefan. And good evening, everyone in the room and everyone online. And thank you, Professor Stefan, once again for your leadership of the Emergency Committee, as well as all members of the committee and the advisors and those who made presentations during today's deliberations. As you know, over the weekend, a man from Butembo took a bus to Goma, a city of 2 million people on the border with Rwanda, and the gateway to the rest of DRC and the world. On his arrival in Goma, the man, a pastor, visited a health center where he was diagnosed with Ebola. He has since died. Separately, last Thursday, a woman with Ebola symptoms from DRC crossed the border to buy fish at a market in Uganda. On Friday, she was diagnosed with Ebola and treated in DRC. She too has died. Although there is no evidence yet of local transmission in either Goma or Uganda, these two events represent a concerning geographical expansion of the virus. As a result of this concern for potential further spread, the committee recommended that I declare the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern, FIC, and I have accepted that advice. Our risk assessment remains that the risk of spread in DRC and the region remains very high, and the risk of spread outside the region remains low. I have also accepted the committee's recommendations for DRC, its neighbors, and all countries, which you can read in the statement. In particular, I emphasize that WHO does not recommend any restrictions on travel or trade, which, rather than stopping Ebola, can actually hamper the fight. Closing borders could have disastrous consequences for the lives and livelihoods of the people who cross the border every day for trade, education, or to visit relatives. Such restrictions force people to use informal and unmonitored border crossings, increasing the potential for the spread of disease. They will also serve no useful purpose. Already there have been more than 75 million screenings for Ebola at border crossings and other checkpoints. We call on all countries, companies, and individuals to support DRC by respecting those recommendations. Now is the time for the international community to stand in solidarity with the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo, not to impose punitive and counterproductive restrictions that will only serve to isolate them. The government of DRC is showing exceptional transparency in sharing information every single day. It was the DRC government which informed Uganda about the family which crossed with Ebola that crossed the border last month. It was the government of DRC that informed the international community immediately last week that there was a case in Goma. The government of DRC is doing everything it can. They need the support of the international community. I stress this. The government of DRC is doing everything it can. They need the support of the international community. That includes its financial support. As we said very clearly after the last emergency committee meeting, Abyei is not for fundraising. It's for preventing the international spread of the disease. WHO is not aware of any donor that has withheld funding because Abyei had not been declared. But if that was the excuse, it can no longer be used. We are now finalizing the fourth strategic response plan for this outbreak, which will outline the resources needed for the next phase of the response. We don't have an exact sum yet, but it will run to the hundreds of millions. Unless the international community steps up and funds the response now, we will be paying for this outbreak for a long time to come. Finally, I want to commend the government of the DRC for its commitment and cooperation, and through His Excellency, the President, who has visited the affected areas and has formed an interministerial committee to ensure the whole government is focused on the response. I also want to honor the hundreds of responders from the government, partners, and our own staff who, as we speak, are putting themselves in harm's way to serve others. More than ever, they need our support. I thank you.
All right, that's a live announcement by the World Health Organization panel of experts in Geneva, now declaring a public health emergency of international concern in regards to the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they're pegging that down to 4 factors. Number 1, saying that there is concern about the spread of Ebola to the town of Goma. That's right on the border with Rwanda. Number 2, saying this disappointment that there's been a recurrence in Beni. Number 3, talking about the fight has been going on now for a year and there is still a recurrence of Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And finally, also talking about the killings of 2 Ebola health workers. They say that signals the risk health workers are still facing in the fight against Ebola. However, they've gone on to commend the government of DRC, saying it's been very transparent on those developments against that disease. Talking about the international community, it should not impose punitive restrictions on the DRC. They're saying they're now finalizing on a response strategy. They say the budget is going to run into hundreds of millions of dollars. We'll have more developments for you in our subsequent bulletins. Now, let's move to Nigeria, where a young Nigerian is doing brisk business with a popular local cuisine in Lagos. Amala is popular with the predominant Yoruba tribe of southwest Nigeria, and Solomon Ogunsanya is cashing in on it. CGTN's Deji Badmas has more.
He's become something of a sensation on social media, all for making amala, a popular local cuisine across southwest Nigeria. And here is Sulaiman preparing the meal in his small restaurant in Lagos. This pot takes less than 10 minutes to prepare, and he says he enjoys every second of it.
There's a special feeling when I'm making amala anyway, so it is just part of me. If you wake me up now that I should come and make amala, I'll just, yeah, let's do it. Because that's one of the basic, major meal that sold me out, especially on the internet, on Twitter, Instagram and the like.
Before now, Sulaiman had worked in insurance and television as a presenter, but he kept being drawn to the food business, which he says is more like a family thing.
My mother used to sell food as well. Like I said, that's my family business. I have uncles that does it as well, so it is like our background business. So we pass it from one generation to the other. So this is like 3rd generation. If I'm to be doing with my family now, my generation is the 3rd generation right now. So, but I just have to, be on my own. I just left the family business a couple of months before we started this place.
With funding support from an uncle, Suleiman set up his Alabula restaurant in February this year. About 5 months on, the business is gradually picking up. He has 3 persons working for him in the restaurant, and whenever he gets outdoor catering orders, he employs more on an ad hoc basis.
Food business is very complex in its way, because you don't expect to start, you cannot really determine the money you're making in the first 3, 4 months, 5 months. That's the fact, because you're still struggling, one. And secondly, this is a new environment you find yourself, and people still need to adapt to your taste and all that. You need to give them reason why they need to come, go and leave the Buka here and come for yours, or they need to leave Buka B and come for yours. So it's quite competitive, but then it's a matter of time that you get to know how much exactly you are really making. So at least we are still making up to 80,000, at least for a start, But as time goes by, I'm very optimistic we'll make more than that. So, but we won't back off. We'll keep pushing.
Despite the initial challenges, Suleiman is looking beyond. He says he plans to take his amala across Africa someday, hoping to leverage on the opportunities the social media has offered him.
No doubt about that. Social media has helped my brand a lot, because I won't lie to you, most of the customers I get, even for the first 2-3 months we started this business, most of them get to know from social media, and whenever they get it, they'll tell me, oh, Asla Alamala, yes, we get to know you from Twitter. So, well, Twitter is my main stream for prospects. That's the truth.
His food business is still very much a work in progress, but Suleiman believes this port of Amala is the catalyst that will eventually transform his enterprise and take him to the sky. Tej Badmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And that's where we'll leave it for this edition of Africa Live. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platform. I'm Penina Karibe. Thanks for watching. Stand by for Global Business. Up next with Buche.